Hey, we're here with Paula Maccabee, and she is a Water Legacy worker here. And I think you're a lawyer for Water Legacy, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
And what, let's talk a little bit about the oral argument at the Minnesota Supreme Court regarding PolyMet. Can you let our audience know a little bit about that?
Sure. We have actually, I've been working with Water Legacy as their lawyer and advocacy director since 2009. And when we started our work, we were told that PolyMet was a done deal and that they would be breaking ground and destroying water quality and precious wetlands in a matter of just a couple of years. And we and our allies, and those allies include the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa and the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior Chippewa and several other really important environmental groups. We've held them off now. It's 13 years. And that's a really important thing to realize, that when people get organized and when resources like lawyers and doctors and technicians and scientists are put into opposing bad things, we can do something about it. So where PolyMet is now, there was a permit to mine that was reversed by the Supreme Court just last year. And this year, part of the water pollution permit was reversed because they didn't follow the Clean Water Act in analyzing seepage. But part of the important part of the PolyMet water pollution was left standing. And so that's why Water Legacy and our allies, we all petitioned the Supreme Court and said, we want you to look at this case. And the Supreme Court took it, and they take only about 5% of the cases, so they agreed it was really important. And these are the issues that we argued up at the Supreme Court last week. One, and Ogama mentioned this, that there was something funky going on in the permitting. Usually, when there's a big project like this, the EPA professional staff will put in their comments in writing. And in this case, EPA let the Minnesota agencies know, we're really concerned about this. We're concerned about the effect on mercury, on sulfate, on wild rice, on the downstream Fond du Lac Band. And we think this permit is going to violate the Clean Water Act and won't be enforceable. And so the Pollution Control Agency knew that. And instead of just dealing with the comments, letting them be public, responding in writing like the law requires, they went to the political higher ups above all of the program people and convinced the Trump administration to quash EPA's comments. So they were never submitted, they were withheld. And so one of the important issues at the Minnesota Supreme Court is, if an agency uses improper procedures, and we proved at the district court level that the procedures were improper, then that agency's decision should be considered unlawful and arbitrary and capricious, and they shouldn't be able to benefit by hiding important information from the public and hiding important information that would hold them accountable. So that was the first issue. We want the permit reversed because EPA should have a chance to put in their comments, and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency should not be rewarded for basically circumventing the law. And then the second issue that Water Legacy argued is that almost every wastewater permit, and certainly a new permit for discharge to impaired waters, has end of pipe limits saying you can't add more than this much pollution. The PolyMet permit, which is new, it has mercury impaired waters all the way from the headwaters of the St. Louis River down to the estuary and Lake Superior. And somehow the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency didn't make them put any end of pipe limits on mercury, sulfite, lead, nickel, arsenic, nothing. And so that was one of the arguments that the EPA made. Water Legacy eventually got their comments by suing the EPA in federal court under Freedom of Information. So we knew that. And that was one of the arguments that we made. And then the Fond du Lac Band made a really compelling argument that Fond du Lac has their own water quality standards. And when the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency gave PolyMet its permit, they didn't even consider the band standards at all. It just wasn't part of their record. And that is another way of saying, it not only was it illegal not to consider it, but it was also another way of showing that they were being arbitrary and just trying to give PolyMet what they wanted rather than following all the laws. And finally, Minnesota law has a really protective rule about groundwater. You're not supposed to put waste into groundwater. And if you have to put something on, like a landfill, you're supposed to have basically the best prevention you can possibly make. Both PolyMet's 526-acre waste rock pile and PolyMet's 1,350-acre tailings waste, they don't have any liners. So the waste would just be going right into the groundwater, the surface, shallow groundwater, and the deeper groundwater. And maybe PolyMet says, oh, once we've released it, we're going to recapture it. But there's nothing in terms of historical examples, field testing that shows how much they're going to recapture. And most Superfund sites that try to do this, they capture about 50, 60%. PolyMet is promising 99% without one bit of evidence that they could actually do it. So exactly what Ogama was talking about is releasing pollution through groundwater, and that groundwater will go back, not only will it affect groundwater, people who have wells in the area, but will go into the wetlands and the surface water and affect people all the way down to the city of Duluth, Lake Superior, and the Fond du Lac Band.
Paula, this is blowing my mind because as you and Ogama told this story today, it's like, what is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency thinking? What is the EPA thinking? I mean, who are these people making these decisions? I mean, is all I could think of in my head as you two were speaking this truth.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Robert. And I grew up in Minnesota, and I always thought we were kind of like Lake Wobegon, where all of our children were above average and we were sort of better than everybody else. But I think what we've learned over the past 13 years at WaterLegacy is that smugness is not deserved. There are many countries, like Ogama was talking about, countries like Brazil and Chile, that wouldn't even allow the kind of dam that PolyMet is proposing to build now. And then there's the issue, we call it regulatory capture, because it's not really that someone at the Pollution Control Agency is getting money to do the wrong thing. It's that the pressure of the politicians at the legislature and the governor is to get the permits done, not to protect the water, not to protect human health, not to protect the future for the climate or nature. And so there's a lot of pressure on the Pollution Control Agency to rubber stamp whatever the company wants. And even a culture of calling the companies that are going to pollute their customers rather than talking about the plants and the animals and the people who are going to drink the water or eat the fish as the real customers of the Pollution Control Agency. So we started out thinking we were going to get PolyMet stopped and then we'd move on. We realized we really have to fight. I'm seeing a flash across the screen of corruption. We need to fight the corruption and regulatory capture that prevents our agencies from acting in the public interest rather than in the private interest of huge multinational corporations.
Yeah,
And
and
my under
we've run into this since Standing Rock and again Line 3. Go ahead, Ogama. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was okay. I just wanted to remind people too that much of the people at the Commissioner's Office of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency are appointed officials. They're not officials that we get the chance as Minnesotans to vote in with our best interests in mind. These are people that are placed into their positions to do this work. And I don't know. I guess I have a question for you, Paula. I don't know how to phrase it per se, but is there any way to take the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency themselves to court for failing their due diligence to Minnesotans for their work?
Well, to a certain extent, by arguing about these irregular procedures, we are taking them to court, but our only remedy here is not like a penalty. It's just that we'd be able to throw out the permit. But I think there's a bigger question is what can we do? I think that what has happened over the years is there's so much money in politics and most people are just struggling to get by, that we have a legislature that is not oriented to protecting nature, not oriented to protecting people, but a company just says money and jobs and they just have been allowing the companies to get away with anything they want. So if I was going to say, what are some of the most important things that people can do, is to become politically active and pay attention to races for governor and raise the profile of clean water, nature, and concern about environmental justice for indigenous communities and low-income communities. That is, I think, the biggest thing that everybody can do just a small piece of.
Wow, Paula, thanks for stopping in. We need to get you on again. We need to do a whole show with you. Excellent information. Ogama, great questions and information too. You're listening to Native Roots Radio Presents I'm Awake, and that was Paula Maccabee of WaterLegacy. We'll